Hello, welcome to the video about backup, the backup module. Prior to this video, we've been through a general tour of all the modules, and importantly, we've looked at client configuration, how to set up storage, and previously we set up this disk-based library here for the storage for our backups. We've looked at drives, we've looked at pools, we've looked at volumes. So at this point, I really need you to be familiar with all of those things that I've just flicked through. If you're not, then please go back and watch some of the previous videos to get up to speed. So in this module, we're going to focus on actually creating the backup workflow, and that centers around the backup plan, which is configured on the left-hand side here. So currently, we don't have any backup plans configured, and when we do the overview section here, will show us each of the backup plans that we've got configured, with also some stats about how successful that backup's been when it's been running. Has it been having any problems? Have there been any errors, and so on? So we'll come back and look at that shortly. So back to backup plans. There's a prompt here to create your first backup plan. Click new. So let's go down there, and up pops the backup plan window. And the very first thing, in fact the only thing we can do to kick off, is to give the backup plan a name. So let's call this one Training Backup A, in case we won't have a B later. So once we apply it with the name entered, then these bits here become ungrayed, and then that allows us to configure backup tasks and backup events, which are the two main things that we need to take care of when we're configuring a backup. So in essence, backup tasks are the clients to back up and the directories on those clients to back up, whether they're enabled or disabled, and whether there's a file filter which might reduce the amount of data that we save from that machine. So at the top, we're basically choosing what we're going to back up, and then at the bottom we're choosing when we're going to back it up. So on a Friday, every day of the week, last Friday of the month, etc. And on those occasions that we're running the backup, the kind of backup that we're running. So we might want to do a full backup on Fridays, incrementals during the week, or we might want to do a full backup once a month, every 3 months, or we might want to do a different kind of backup called progressive, where you don't have to run full backups explicitly. So let's start out by configuring some backup tasks. Now, if we click new, currently you'll remember from the previous video that we have two clients configured. We've got localhost, which is actually the machine on which Archiware is running, and we've also got Mac Mini Server, which is a machine which is a client, and this client is accessed via the Ethernet LAN network. So we're pulling data over the network for this machine here, and the disks attached to this localhost machine are available locally. So let's start out by choosing localhost, and you can see by default Archiware chooses to back up everything on the machine. So that's what all means. So if it's left on all, then all the disks attached to this machine will be backed up. So that means if it's a server with a RAID and a local system boot disk, then both of those disks would be backed up in their entirety. So that's a kind of simple way of backing everything up, and that's the default if you don't change it. However, if you click the browse button down here, then the familiar from previous videos file system browser appears, and this lets us choose what we want to back up. So I don't want to back everything up. I want to back up a fairly small directory, and I'm going to choose the preferences folder within the current user as the directory I want to back up. So this directory is a useful one to back up because it's got lots of small files in, so it's quick to back up for training purposes, but the files frequently change, which is also useful, and you'll see why shortly. The button, you can click it several times if you wish, and choose some different folders to back up on that machine. And at the bottom, the file filter drop down we'll come back to in an advanced video and explain file filters, so don't worry about that one for now. So we apply that, and then the table at the top now shows us the localhost client with the list of directories that are being backed up. It's enabled, so this is going to run when this backup runs. And you can then click new and add other machines that you want to back up. So I could choose the Mac Mini Server, and in just the same way, by hitting the three dot button, we can browse the volumes attached to that machine. So this machine has 2 disks attached, and again I'm going to be interested in saving the library preferences folder. Okay, so I'll just save that one folder on the Mac Mini server, apply that, and now we have 2 machines and 2 sets of folders in our backup plan. And you can add as many clients as you wish to a single backup plan. The beauty of that is that you don't need to run 7 backups because you've got 7 machines. You can run 1 backup and it can simultaneously back up all of those machines if you wish, or you can control how many machines it backs up at a given time. The previous video, which explains pools, talks about how the number of machines being backed up at once can be determined by the settings on the storage pool. So having configured our backup tasks at the top, down at the bottom we can make a backup event. So again, we click the new button and a backup event looks like this. At the top we have the backup level, which is basically the kind of backup that we're running. You're probably already familiar with full and incremental backups. A full backup being a backup which saves everything specified in the backup plan from scratch to tape or disk, whereas an incremental backup will save anything that's changed since the last time this backup plan ran. So that means that if you ran a full backup and then did nothing for a week and ran an incremental, then we would compare the files on disk that we're looking to back up with the index that is stored within a database and figure out all the changes that have occurred in that week, and then save all of those changes in addition to the previous backup. So then that would mean that you can then browse within the index, and we'll look at this shortly, and choose a point in time that you want to see what was on the disk at that point in time. So you end up with snapshots through time. That's a very quick explanation of full and incremental. So for the purposes of looking in this window, let's say that we want to create a backup workflow where a full backup happens at a minute to midnight every Friday. So rather than saying daily, the frequency is going to be just Fridays, with no exception. So I could say the first Friday of the month skip and things like that, but I won't say that. And then down at the bottom, the target pool allows me to choose from any of the pools that we created, and I refer you back to the previous video, pools that were for backup. So we're only seeing pools for backup here. Although we have an archive pool configured, we're only interested in choosing a backup plan here, so that's what we're shown. So if I apply that, then this backup event appears in the table. So remember, this is running a full backup weekly on Fridays, so I'm going to create another event that's going to make an incremental backup weekly on Mondays, Tuesdays, Wednesdays and Thursdays. Incremental backup. I also want to run this at a minute to midnight, and again no exceptions, and it's going to write to the same pool, apply. So now we have a simple backup workflow where the backup plan is going to save everything on Fridays, which is going to take as much space as there is data, and then through the week we're just going to be saving the changes that have occurred between Friday and Monday, and then Monday and Tuesday, and so on. So just to revisit the options that are available when creating a schedule, you can of course have frequency none, which means that this event exists within the backup plan, but you have to run it manually. It doesn't run on its own. The daily basically means run every day, but if you set this to 2, then it will run every second day, starting from the start date that you specify. So each of these backup events has a one-off start date, which is the first time this event will run, and after that date it will run according to the way the schedule has been configured. So that's daily. Weekly is the one that you saw, so that allows you to select specific days of the week, and if you had it run on a Monday starting on whatever date this is here, and you set this to 2, then it will run on 1 week on those dates, and then not on the next week, and then on the following week, and so on. And then monthly allows you to choose 1 day within the month. So that could be the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, or last for 5-week months day. So the last Sunday, the first Monday, and so on. So within the frequency options, you can pretty much specify anything that's possible, I think. Let's put it back to weekly, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And the exception has the same options, but just basically makes a hole effectively in the schedule that you've configured at the top. So you could say every day, and then down here you could say except the last Friday. Down at the bottom here, it is possible to add multiple pools to the backup, and I'm going to cover that in the more advanced video where we look at sort of more advanced backup techniques. So for the time being, we're just going to choose one pool down here. I don't think I made any changes there, so I'm going to cancel that. So we now have our backup configured. Now there are additional options available to us up here, but in order just to run a simple backup, we don't need to look at these. In order to run a simple backup, we don't need to worry about these yet. We'll have a look at those shortly. So I'm going to hit apply at the bottom of my backup plan. And this backup is now possible to run because these two machines here are available to provide the folders that we've asked for. And the backup events down here are writing to a pool called backup disk. And you'll remember that there is a pool configured here called backup to disk that currently has no space used in it, but there are 4 volumes available in this pool to write to, and there's a total of 8 gigabytes, and that's because we've labeled 4 backup disk volumes here. And because this is a disk library, these volumes are actually existing as files within this folder here. So these first 4 files here are our backup volumes. So to run our backup plan, we have 2 options. Within the backup plan, you may have noticed already that there is a Start Now button. And the Start Now button allows you to make a selection within the clients and within the backup events and run that kind of a backup. So for example, we could hit the full backup and we could say Start Now. And because I haven't chosen which client to back up, Archiware will let me know that it's going to back up all of the clients. And if we say OK, our Start button changes to a monitor button. We get a message saying it's happening. If we hit the monitor button, and we're fairly quick, we get to see our 2 backups running in the job monitor window. And after the 2 backup tasks have saved, the local host machine and the Mac Mini, there are a couple of additional jobs which save the backup index database back to the volume as well. And that's done for disaster recovery purposes, so that the whole backup workflow, all of the settings and indexes can be recovered just from having the tapes available. And the advanced video for backup will cover how to recover everything from tape. That's an important thing to know. So our last the backup of the Mac Mini is just completing, and now all 4 of those jobs, the 2 training backup A jobs, which first one saving the Mac Mini server, second one saving localhost, and the saving of the backup indexes also ran, and everything was successful. We've got green lights down the left hand side. So you can see the level was full because that's what we requested the job run as, and the size for the Mac Mini is 1.5 meg, and for the local machine it's 451k, so quite small. And then we get some stats about how long the job took, the job number, start time, end time. And the job monitor allows you to double click on one of these jobs to see more information about the job, including the time stats, but also the drive that was used. You might have lots of tape drives, and so here we can see which drive was actually used and the volume that was used. Often there'll be several volumes used to perform a backup, so you'd have a list of volumes here. Extended log is really for support purposes, allows you to see a more detailed list of all of the operations, all time stamped. So at the top of the job monitor, this area up here, you'll also see that there are 2 jobs scheduled. So the little clock icon indicates that this is a scheduled job, and you can see as requested there'll be an incremental backup running, today being a Tuesday, and that's going to run at 1 minute to midnight today on the 10th of June. So the other way of manually running a backup is to highlight the job here and say Start Now. Or if a job is running and you'd like it to cancel, you use this button here. So having run the backup, it's now possible to see the results of that backup in terms of seeing what was saved, within Archiware's web interface, and we do that via the Restore button up here. So within Restore, you've got the ability to browse backup, backup to go, and archive indexes. So let's go into backup, and then within here we see two backup indexes. So Archiware creates a backup index per client. So if we had a database server and a mail server client also added, we would also see those indexes here, and you click into the correct index to locate the files that you're looking for. So if we went into the localhost index, then we are now within the index browser, and what we can see here is a folder structure and files that were backed up. So remember, we backed up a users, and I'm double clicking here to drill down, P5 demo, library, and then at that point we backed up two different folders. So let's have a look at the preferences folder, and now we see the files that were saved in the preferences folder. Just to sort of spin around the interface, this is a breadcrumb trail, so-called, and this basically allows you to see the path that you're currently located at. So we're in the backup index for localhost in users, P5 demo, library, preferences, and these are buttons, so we could drop back to library if we wanted to, drop back into preferences, by host, back a folder. The arrow here also lets you move back a folder. Interestingly, you can search, so if you touch the search button, then you can choose a name to search on. So that's pretty straightforward. You can search by name, date, or size, and you can search starts with, contains, and so on. So if I was to type search for Finder, then I would find the file with Finder within the file name, and so on. If I switch off search, then I go back to seeing all the files in the folder. Now what I want to do now is, in order to show you how this menu works here, which is the menu which allows us to browse different snapshots at points in time when the backup has run, we'll need to run this backup again. Now the contents of this preferences folder is pretty much in constant flux, and if we sort this column by date, you can see some of the preferences files have been modified fairly recently. If I were to run an application that I haven't run for a while, like the App Store maybe, and quit it again, then the chances are that there'll be a plist file in this folder that will have changed, and that file would then be saved if we were to run an incremental backup. If we were to do a search and locate that plist file, which I know to be called App Store, and it contains App Store, and I didn't want the space. So we can see this file was backed up, it's in the index, but on the file system the file hadn't changed since the 28th of May, and today is about the first week of June. So what we're going to do is run the incremental backup again, and knowing that that file has changed on the file system, we should then be able to see this file has a different modification date in the index. So let's visit the job monitor window and manually run the backup of localhost. So here's the job here, scheduled to run tonight, incremental. So if we say start now and start that job, the job will still run this evening, but we're just going to run an extra instance of it now. Then the backup plan is going to be just looking for the changes since the last time the job ran. So rather than saving the full 451K, which is pretty minimal anyway, we'll see a smaller number of files saved this time. So that job ran, and this time just saved 47K. So that 47K should include the file for the App Store plus anything else that's changed in the last few minutes. So let's visit the index again and browse, drill down to the preferences folder, and then if again this time while we have the list sorted by date, we can now see that the App Store file changed today, 10th of June at 9:51, which was a couple of minutes ago. So this file here was first saved by the full backup and then was saved again by the incremental because it changed between the first and the second job running. And the versions button down at the bottom here will show us all instances of that file in the index. So now we can see that the file was backed up at 9:44 and then again at 9:54, and we can also see the modification date on the file itself. So you can see there's an important difference between the backup date, which is the date that it was saved by Archiware, and the modification date, which is just the file system date that tells us when the file was modified. The other way to view the index is via this menu here. So you remember the first time we clicked on this, there was just the 944 date shown. Now there are two dates and there's a tick against 954. So what this means is that by default you're always viewing the most recent snapshot of the file system when you're looking at the index. So that's why by default we're seeing the modified version of the App Store plist at this point and not the previous version. But it might be that we want to see the files from an earlier point in time, and that's done by using this menu. So I can click on the 944 backup date, and now in our list of files sorted by modification date, we don't see the App Store file because it was modified back in the previous month. I'd have to scroll down to May to find it. So you can move yourself through the various snapshots that you've created by running the backup plan at different points in time, and that allows you to locate files that you might want to restore from past days. You'll also have noticed that within the snapshot browser menu there's a more options button, which again allows us to choose the date that we're interested in, and remember that there may be tens or hundreds of dates available to choose from, and in that case not all of those dates will be shown in the drop down menu. You'll need to visit this index options window to access all of those dates. And also there are start and end date pickers, so if you're interested in a particular range of dates you can choose the earliest date in this date picker and the latest date here to restrict the list of dates shown in the list. And over here on the right hand side you can also choose only to show results that have been saved to a particular backup pool. So the reason for this is that you might have two separate pools of volumes that you're using on different days to save the same data to give yourself an on-site and an off-site backup, meaning that if you were to lose an entire pool of tapes, then your other pool would still allow you to restore everything. So it may be that you're browsing the index to do a restore, but you only have a certain pool of tapes available on that day, and therefore you would want to restrict your search within the index to just show you files that are saved on tapes that you have available to you. And then within that pool it's also possible to restrict the search to specific volumes. So having chosen our backup disk pool here, you can see that the volume to which all of our backups have saved data so far is listed. So in our case it doesn't make any sense not to show files from that volume because everything is on that volume. But if you had 10 volumes and one of them was missing, you could just search and show the files that are on the volumes that you have, so that you're not attempting to restore files from volumes that you don't have available. So let's return that to its default setting. So you've got the ability to browse the index, search the index, and view different snapshots. Finally, looking at the top of the index browser, there's a view button. View button's pretty simple. It just allows you to turn columns on and off and apply that change. So if we weren't interested in seeing size, we could lose the size. We can turn the size back on, and doing that resets us back to the top level of the index. So let's browse down again into preferences, and the view menu also allows you to switch on and off and adjust pagination. On this view here you can see at the bottom there's one page, and currently we're showing 200 items per page. Obviously it might be that you've backed up a folder that's got 1 million files in it, and then if we were to try and show you 1 million files in a single scrolling view like this, then your web browser would probably run out of memory. So therefore by default we paginate and show 200, and then if there are more than 200 then you flick through using this page browser at the bottom, page 2, page 3 and so on. So next, restoring. So there's no point in having all of this stuff in the index unless you are able to restore it. Let's say we're interested in restoring one file. Well, that's easy. We just choose the file and we say restore to, and restore to brings up this window. So this window will see in any restore job that we trigger. The default is that it's going to restore back to the same machine that the file was originally saved from, which is localhost, and it's not going to be relocated to a directory. It's going to be restored back to its original location. While restoring back to original locations, we need to resolve potential conflicts, because maybe the file is already there. Maybe there's an older file already there and we're replacing it with a newer one, or vice versa. So the default conflict resolution is to only overwrite if the file that we're restoring is newer than the one that already exists on the file system. But if that's not meeting your requirements, then you can overwrite the file regardless, or you can retain both files, the old one and the one being restored, and the one being restored will receive an extra couple of characters on the end of the file name. Or if there's a conflict, then you can discard the recovered file, which means that the file will not be overwritten. Nothing will happen where there is a conflict. If I hit next, that file is going to get restored, and after the little counting operation there, the restore tells me how many files are being restored, total size, and importantly the volumes that are required to perform this restore and whether those are available or not. So online in library means that this particular volume, backup disk number 1, is available, and we can trigger this restore right now and that'll be fine. In order to make it a bit more visible though, let's restore to a different location. So I'm going to say relocate to directory this time, and within the client's video you'll find that there is a way of adding directories to this predefined list of restore locations, but the default is to just provide the currently logged in user's desktop as a visible place to restore to, or you can use the regular file picker here to choose a folder that you want to restore to. So let's just choose the P5 Demos desktop, say next, and say start, because it's restoring one file and it's available to restore. And then that will run as a job, just as the backups themselves ran as jobs in the job monitor. You'll see that plist file has appeared on the desktop, and if we'd been quicker pulling up the monitor window, oh no, it's still running, then we can actually see that job just finishing off and returning the volume back to its slot. So simplest restore, we've restored a plist file. Obviously you can use the shift key to make a multiple selection that might include folders if you want to restore more data, or maybe I was interested in restoring this entire folder, in which case I would drop back a folder and then highlight preferences and say restore the preferences folder. An alternative way though of locating files to restore that might not all be in the same place is to use the add to restore selection button. So let's have a look at this. So what we do is we select a file or some files and we say add to restore selection, and that triggers the loading of this restore selection window, which floats on top of everything else and has its own add and remove buttons. So I can now visit a different folder. So maybe I want to go into the favorites folder, rather maybe not, because that folder's empty. Let's go back into preferences and by host, and maybe we want to add some files from this directory here. So I can either say add to restore selection or use the plus button here, and then maybe I want to include an entire folder, maybe this Macromedia folder here. So I'm basically building a shopping basket of things I want to restore, and the basket has its own restore button which will trigger the restore of those files. And if I hit next, it will say that there are 20 files this time, totaling 28K, and again they're all on the same volume because all of our backups would have just written the first volume in that pool so far. So the restore selection, nice way of collecting various files to restore, particularly useful later on when we look at the archive product. So just to recap, what we've done so far is we've created a backup plan. The backup plan is targeting 2 folders that we wish to back up, and we've created a backup schedule that contains a full backup which will run on Fridays and incremental backups which will run on the other 4 working days of the week. And then when we run that backup, we're able to visit the restore area and choose the client of interest, and then browse or search down through the folder tree that we backed up and locate the files that have been backed up, view different points in time within this this index to maybe find files that were we know existed 3 weeks ago but have subsequently been deleted. We can use the date browsers to locate those dates and locate the files that existed on those dates, and then we can trigger restores by using the restore to or add to restore selection buttons at the bottom of the window. And the versions button over here allows us to view all the versions of the selected file in the index so that we can see if there is a version of that file from 3 weeks ago that we think we might be interested in restoring. So let's now delve a little deeper into our backup plan. If we go back in and edit this backup plan, you will remember that I briefly showed you the additional options pane, and there are just a few options here to explain to you. So let's go through them in turn. Each of these options at the top has a tooltip if you forget what they do, or if I forget, which of course I wouldn't. Scan files before backup allows us to create statistical information while the job's running. So ordinarily, Archiware, to its advantage really, will, when it starts backing up a large folder structure, rather than begin by calculating every file that it needs to back up before it puts a tape or disk in a drive and starts writing that data, Archiware will by default just work folder by folder and start saving data pretty much as soon as the plan starts running. The downside of that is that because we didn't do a count of the entire set of files to be saved, the total number of files and an estimate of the total time needed to save those files will not be available in the job monitor while the job is running. So if you want that upfront counting of all the files and statistical information saying the job is 10% complete and maybe an estimate of how many hours, minutes it's going to take, then you switch this one to on, or yes rather. So that's off by default because that means generally that we work quicker. Volume use, moving on to the next option, forces a new tape for a new full backup cycle. So this means that when a backup plan runs a full backup, if this is, well, the default, append to media, which is the setting you can see, means that if we'd previously been writing volume number 1, but volume number 1 wasn't yet full, then we would write the full backup to the same volume number 1 until it's full and then continue on to the next volume. The alternative is to use new media, which means that whenever you run a full backup, it will force the full backup to take the previous tape that is not yet full and mark that tape as closed, so it will not be used anymore, and then start on a fresh tape for the full backup. The reason you might want to do that is so that you can remove tapes being written prior to that full backup, remove those from a tape library and put them somewhere outside of the tape library without having to leave the last volume in because it's now containing the beginning of the next full backup. The job timeout waiting on volumes really has to do with using tape libraries, and what it means is that, and as you can see, there is a number of different amounts of time that you can choose. What happens is if a job is running and it requires more volumes than it actually has available, so therefore let's say a job needs 10 volumes and there are only 2 volumes available and they've both been filled, then the job by default will wait for an unlimited amount of time and it will sit in the job monitor indicating to you that it needs more volumes in whichever pool it's writing. And then you get the option to go label volumes or move volumes into the tape library to allow that job to complete. If you would sooner that job errors after 1 hour or some selected amount of time, then you can choose that from this menu and the job will behave as you've selected. So you might prefer it that if a job doesn't have enough volumes available, then it errors and you can clearly see that there's an errored job, and then you have to rerun the job after making volumes available for it. The recycle policy settings in the additional options of a backup plan allow you to determine how long Archiware will make sure that older saved data remains available on tapes. And at this point I think it's going to make sense to do a bit more scribbling to just to put over how tape recycling works, how volume recycling works, and how these two different options work. I'm going to do some scribbling now to illustrate how backup plans work in terms of volume use and volume expiry and retention and so on. So let's think of what I'm going to explain now as a traditional backup, and this starts with a backup plan. So this is what we've been looking at configuring in the interface. And as you know, backup plan takes some storage, some disks with files on that we wish to back up as its starting point. And then this gets written out to pools, and we write full or incremental backups to a given pool or pools. And a pool is a container, so this is a pool. And within a pool we have volumes, which are containers for the data on some storage device. So they might be tapes or they might be files on a disk. So my pool's not quite big enough. There's 6 volumes, and they'll be labelled with an incrementing number. And then we run the backup. So let's say we start out with a full backup on the first day, and let's say that the full backup runs and it fills 1 and a bit tapes up. So now we've got data here and we've got data here, and there's still some room on that second tape. These tapes are, let's for argument's sake say they're LTO6 tapes, which give us 2.5 terabytes of capacity per tape, so several terabytes worth of capacity in the pool. So we run the full, that's great, and then we decide that we want to continue with incremental backups. So the next event is an incremental backup that runs every day. So how long do we run the incremental backup for? Well, let's say that the retention period that's set on the pool is set to 28 days. What does that mean? It means we're asking Archiware to keep the data that's being written to volumes for at least 28 days, and after 28 days then it's okay to erase that data from the tapes if we need tapes in the pool. In this example here, we've only got 6 tapes. We can't keep writing incremental backups forever because we're going to run out of space. So it might be that we can run incremental backups for a month and not fill many tapes up. So let's, for example, say that we write incremental backups and we basically fill up 1 more tape's worth of space. So we're now on the 3rd tape, and this took 1 month. So this took about 28 days. So our options now are that we could just continue to run incremental backups over here and fill up the 6 tapes. But there's going to be no possibility then for erasing and recycling tapes, because all the tapes will be required to restore anything from that set of tapes over whatever period of time you've been backing up. Because we've only taken 1 full backup, that full backup will be needed by any restore. So to stand any chance of being able to recycle volumes in our pool, we will need to repeat the full backup, and then once we've resaved all the data in that full backup, then the first tapes that we wrote over here can then be recycled. And it's the retention period that determines when volumes can be recycled. So what we would do next is schedule another full backup. So we would repeat the full backup after 1 month. And the full backup, as we know, took about 1.5 tapes of space up. So that means that we would then write a full backup in here, and that would fill up 3 and tape 4. And then we can then continue to do incremental backups over here again for another period of a month. And at that point we'll be, let's say, on the last tape in our volume. Now what happens with the 28 days retention period is that once we are 28 days into the backup, the first volume that was written will change its status from being full to being recyclable, because we've said that we are happy for volumes that are 28 days old to be recycled. Therefore, as we fill up the 6th volume over here and we require another volume, we really need to have volume number 7 over here to continue the workflow. Given that there's a tape over here that is now recyclable, what the system will do is when it needs tape 7, it will recycle this tape, and that means it effectively gets relabeled. So the tape is removed and all the data on it is removed from the index, so it will no longer be possible to restore that data, and it will become volume 7 over here, and so on, and we'll continue to add volumes to the pool in this manner, but only when the oldest data on a volume is 28 days old. So by tuning the retention period parameter, you can determine when volumes become recycled and therefore how long your data is retained on tape for. So as you can see, the retained data period that you configure here has a pretty major effect on the way that the backups will work. And if we just close the backup window for a moment and go to look at the volumes, we've run a couple of backups earlier on, and therefore this volume number 1 in our backup disk pool over here now has an expiration date of the 8th of July. So today is the 10th of June, so you can see that this is 28 days ahead from today. So each time a volume is written, the expiration date on that volume is set, in this case 28 days ahead as required by the backup plan, and therefore it means that the data that's been written to that volume today is going to be kept for at least 28 days. But if the volume is written a week from now again, then the expiration date would be moved on 28 days forward from a week forward from now. So the expiration date on volumes will keep changing until the volume is filled, and then the last expiration date set on the volume will remain on that volume until the expiration date is reached, and on that date the mode of the volume will change from full, so this volume is currently appendable, but the volume would be full, and then the volume will switch to being recyclable at that point. So you'll see the volume will show up in the list as being recyclable, as you can see there. And then if the volume is needed, it will be recycled and reused. I'm just going to set that back to appendable, back to what it was. Okay, so there ends the first video on backup, where I'm aiming to get across all the basics about how to configure and execute a simple backup plan. There's going to be a follow-up video with more advanced concepts for backup, where we will look at the other backup mechanism which was shown in the additional options pane of the backup. So this so-called progressive backup setting here will be explained in a little more detail. And we will also look at the ability to run additional pools in a single backup event. So we'll create a second pool, and you'll see how you can use 2 pools or 3 pools and alternate between those pools to provide you with a on-site, off-site backup workflow. So that'll be in the advanced video. But for now, I'm going to finish this video, the backup video, and thanks for watching.